Hey, it's syndicated radio talk show host, author, singer Al Cole, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. I come from CBS Radio. My shows are nationally syndicated, and I've helped pave the way to treating women, guys too, with the dignity that they deserve, and I do that through my show People of Distinction, aired on very dignified radio networks, including the biggest airing CBS shows, and that's Apple's iTunes radio network under their professional news talk division, airing CBS shows, Fox News, NPR, BBC, the whole kit and caboodle, C-SPAN as well. Best talk in the country around the world on Apple's iTunes radio network under News Talk, and also I have my own broadcasting network called the Al Cole Broadcasting Network, airing through Apple and other great networks to get people of distinction out there. And I have my alliances with Ariana Huffington, the founder of the Huffington Post, and her Thrive Global Network. Also my People of Distinction Humanitarian Awards events, national events in New York, Capitol Hill, with members of the U.S. Congress, U.S. Congressman Rob Whitman of Virginia sponsoring the events at the Rayburn House Office Building. And also great events in Florida and Atlanta, too. And I'm a New York Times best-selling author with Chicken Soup for the Soul. And Chicken Soup for the Soul is distributed by CBS's Simon & Schuster. So we love that. We keep it in the family that way. You can go to my website, learn more about me, listen to the shows, my broadcasting network, and everything at peopleofdistinction.org. That's peopleofdistinction.org. And you can email me if you want to learn anything more about what I do, or request a guest stint on my show, whatever. Email me at alcoleholic@gmail.com. You heard me right. That's alcoleholic@gmail.com. And I really want to thank my CBS radio listeners for coming up with that handle, alcoleholic. I love it. Seems like from day one, my listeners have been saying, Al, we love what you're doing there, brother. In fact, we're hooked on it. We're alcoholics. Love that stuff. And coming from CBS Radio, I'm also a media consultant, major media consultant. I help people to understand what media is all about. Interviewing to their best with putting their best foot forward with wonderful core messages that are easily grasped by listeners. And also, if they're going to be podcasting, if they're going to be doing the AM, FM radio route, or TV, I teach people how to understand formats and formatics out there, branding, understand how to professionally network with other professional leaders for profitability. In other words, bottom line is how to be entrepreneurial about what they are talking about in terms of their products or services, how to make their products and services serve them with great value entrepreneurially. I help them out that way with all of my media consulting. So alcoholic@gmail.com you can reach me at. Today, we've got a very interesting guest. His name is Robert Paul Berry, and he's going to be talking about an exceptional book. I guarantee you've never heard of this guy before. I'm not talking about Robert Paul Berry. I'm talking about the title of his book and the first name to the title of his book. All right, now I got you thinking. His book is called Ephus and the Praying Bushel. Now get that. I know that maybe the first time I said it, you're saying, "Ow, wait, say that again. I didn't quite get it. Did you say Ephus or no? Ephus. It's actually spelled E-P-H-U-S. And the P-H sounds like an F. Like photograph, that sort of thing. Ephus. And the Praying Bushel. All right. I think it's starting to sink in. Yeah, I'm starting to get that, Al. Interesting title. But what does it mean? I don't know. I just don't know what to make of it. Yeah. That's because it's something based on historical novel stuff. Yeah, it's a novel, but it's based on something historical that very few people are privy to. It is Ephus, a merchant who becomes a follower of guess who? Jesus Christ. And so the prayer comes into it, and Ephus, what he does with his bushel to become a follower of Jesus, and how he elevates his own life by becoming a follower of Jesus, because Jesus is actually doing the elevating there. Now, get this, people. This actually sounds like you. Yeah, it sounds like everybody. Everybody has a spiritual component to them. We are born spiritual creations, and that baby in you is the proof. When you were born and that baby came out, that baby said, wow, I'm here. I've made it. I'm actually alive. And that baby was saying, thank you, life, for bringing me into this beautiful spiritual adventure, which is a love adventure. Thank you for blessing me with the joy of love of life. And sometimes we go downhill and we forget about the love of the joy of life. And we just, it's paying the bills and it's stress, and this and that. But if we get back to just the innocence of love, people, the first step is love and trying to recreate that love spiritually. That's what Robert is talking about in his book, among many other things that he will introduce you to. Ephus was a man who was a merchant, just like many of you, my listeners, who are business people. And then you're trying to find yourself. And you're trying to find yourself by following somebody. Yeah, hero worship, that sort of thing. Well, what better hero worship, if we want to call it that, than being a follower of Jesus Christ? And see, that's what Robert is getting out there. And he's getting out there through a character who might be very much like you, a merchant, and what he does with his bushel, and how he formulates prayer, things along that line. Some of the deepest aspects of our human family development. So I want you to stick around here, people, because I know you're gripped by the storyline. Yeah, spirituality. And a merchant who becomes a follower of Jesus. Yeah, let's stick around and hear what Robert Paul Berry has to say about it with his book. And while you're sticking, hey, run to Amazon.com and order this book, Ephus and the Praying Bushel, by our special guest, Robert Paul Berry. And we're going to bring him on right now. Welcome to People of Distinction with Al Cole. Robert, how are you doing today?
I'm doing quite well, thank you very much. And how are you today?
I'm doing quite well myself, and it's a pleasure to have you aboard and talking about a character, historical character, who you have novelized in your book, Ephus and the Praying Bushel. Not many of us, and I think you know this, have any knowledge of who Ephus was. So let's start out that way. You wrote a historical novel. Who was Ephus? Is he in the Bible, that merchant who becomes a follower of Jesus?
Ephus is in the Bible and not in the Bible. Ephus is someone who obviously is in the Bible, but he's not mentioned. He's one of the people who were in the throng. He's one of the followers who were in the multitude. He's someone who caught wind of something going on and was excited by it. And Ephus, not to be one who's left out of something, wanted to find out what this excitement was about. And so he follows and he listens, and he becomes enthralled, and it begins to change his life. And he begins to imitate what he hears and what he sees. And he begins to try to live out the life that he's being instructed by Jesus to live. And he finds that, as he says in his own words, it's not easy to walk with Jesus. He has long legs.
Uh-huh. And that's a metaphor.
Yes.
Long legs indeed. Now, Ephus was, a merchant of that time, and like many other people, learned about Jesus and was enthralled that way, wanted to follow. When he started to follow Jesus, you're indicating that the bushel was a very important part of this, that praying bushel. Was that a part of Ephus's business at that point, selling bushels or whatever?
Yes, actually, it was a basket that he had gone into Samaria to have these constructed, woven for him specially for his grape harvest. They were harvest baskets, and he was carrying one this particular day, and it ends up being involved in the an intricate twist in the plot. But this basket was a harvest basket for his grapes. He's a wine merchant and also a grape and raisin merchant. And he has traveled the caravan ways. He's been to Egypt. He's been out along the Silk Road. He knows a lot. He's known as a storyteller himself. And so he tells stories. And it's interesting, the character actually came to me before he was novelized. It's very interesting that you spoke that I novelized the character. That's very true. I actually performed this character as an actor in live performances for some time before there was a suggestion that I write the stories down, and so I had a collection of stories, and then someone made a suggestion that I write a book about Ephus because the character was so vivid and living to people who saw him portraying this time, and it took them back to the first century, took them back to the time of Christ, and exposed them to the culture, the history, the Roman occupation, the fact that the Palestinian province at this Roman occupied Palestine was a very diverse place, and Ephus himself is a Cushite Jew, but he makes his sacrifices and follows, and his family did so for generations, and something changes though when he sees Jesus, and he follows, and he begins to preach in whatever manner that he can and to teach in whatever manner that he can. And Ephus has a side ministry. He's a baker. At one time, before he became a merchant, he was a baker. And he, on the street of bread, street of bakers. And he learned how to bake bread that's very nutritious. And he has a ministry of giving away bread in the morning and talking about what he's learned about Jesus. And so this is how he is starting his ministry.
Wow. Hey, this is dripping stuff here, people. Stay with us on People of Distinction with Al Cole, and today, Robert Paul Berry, special guest, and his book, a historical novel called Ephus and the Praying Bushel, and it's available to you at Amazon.com. And I will say he was brought to me by a wonderful publisher out there, Link Publishing. And I want you to run to their website if you want to get involved with helping yourself to move your book. They're one of the best movers in the industry. linkpublishing.com. Let's get back to your book here, Ephus and the Praying Bushel, Robert. So now we're starting to get it. Ephus was in the Bible and not so much in the Bible. He was a follower of Jesus, as many were at that time, a merchant, and let's call him a wine merchant, and uses bushels to build up some of the wine bottles, we would think. And as he did that, he was thinking, how can I serve Jesus and the Spirit? How did he actually, in more direct ways, serve Jesus and the Spirit at that time?
He has to learn compassion. He has to learn to give of himself. He has to learn to take himself out of himself. Ephus, from being a storyteller and being a man of the caravan ways, is something of a braggart. And being a merchant, he brags about his merchandise. But he has to tone some of that down at times to tell more about the spirit of the issue, the spiritual connection that he has with Jesus, and convey that to his audience. And so he uses the Torah. He uses the what we call, of course, the Old Testament. He uses the prophets and their words, and he relates those to the culture that he is talking to, because they're familiar with this as a basis for
Humility.
understanding what Jesus is saying.
Humility. Yeah. That's a big part of it. Spirituality has to involve humility. You can't make a big deal just out of you. Life itself is the big deal. And the creator of life is the big deal. And Ephus had to learn that. just like some other characters in the Bible. Is there another character, too, not to stray away from Ephus, we're going to come back, in a way that my listeners can relate to Ephus? Was there any other character in the Bible who had to learn humility in the same way that Ephus had to learn humility, Robert?
Peter.
Aha, Peter. Tell us about that.
Peter was apparently a relatively successful seafood entrepreneur. He had more than one boat. He had people who he could hire to work for him, and he was busy working. However, despite his standing in the fisherman community and standing in the Galilee area, he found that he had to humble himself and that he had to take himself out of the equation. And it was difficult for Peter. And sometimes it's difficult for Ephus. And I think that's because it's difficult for all of us sometimes to take ourselves out of the equation and stay on the spiritual message that we're working on.
Really, it really is. Now, once he took himself, his ego, out of the equation, what was the transformation that Ephus made? Even though most people don't even know about Ephus, but Ephus can be a great goal. He can be a wonderful model here for so many people. How did he transform himself? And particularly, how did Jesus utilize Ephus's skills in transformation, in humility, to help other people that way, Robert?
What he learned from Jesus was to help those who were in need, to not pass by the beggar, to not pass by the widow, to give of himself in those situations. How he transformed was he stepped out of his fear. He stepped out of his fear, and that was the biggest transformation personally for him. In Roman-occupied Palestine, the Jewish people, having already rebelled and been put down by this time, had fear of the Romans because the Romans' punitive measures were very harsh. That's how they maintained the peace in the empire, by harsh punishment. They had a climate of fear as the empire stood behind a shield of fear. And so the expression of that is in the Roman army, which is occupying Palestine. And there is a passage in the book where a Roman soldier who is coming into the town, coming into Jerusalem, comes and takes up a position right next to where Ephus is located. And this causes a crisis of courage for Ephus. And he has to overcome his fear of the Romans to actually begin a dialogue on spirituality with the Roman and begin to tell him what he has heard of Jesus. And although the Roman, in the end, maybe isn't all that convinced, perhaps he looked back a couple of times as he went on about his business later on and thought about what Ephus said to him. We'll see maybe in the next book what happened with that Roman.
Hi, we like that. Respect. I'm going to make a quick reflection here on what Robert is talking about with Ephus and the Roman that relates to you. My listening audience right now. You don't always have to convince everybody that you're the one, you're on the right track, or whatever you want to impart to them is on the right track, and talk to them as if they had to be a convert into what you believe. One of the main things to get out is respect. When you respect others and talk to others in a way that they can understand, when you understand others enough to be able to reveal your message to their heart, to their soul, in the way now, in that individualized way, that they become the individual. Now, sometimes they might move in your direction. Other times they might not, but they will usually respect you for respecting them. It sounds like maybe Ephus was on that right track of getting over his fear. That's the first thing you got to do. Fear will stop us cold many, many times. But if we get over that fear and we see others, kind of like the way that we see ourselves, as human beings searching for love and direction in this world, and if you truly believe that you have one of the answers, maybe that can help people with that love direction in their lives, well, you're talking to their heart. You're talking to their soul. You're not necessarily talking to the ego of that person or the bigness of that person, the bigness and badness of that person. You're really talking into the spiritual aspect of that person. And you're saying, I understand. I know what you're going through, and I'm here to help. And you don't have to take my help, but I'm just going to explain it my way. And you think about it, maybe you'll come back, and maybe another point, maybe something that I say you might be able to impart to somebody else. If you do it in that self-effacing way, in that way of humility, other people will say, well, yeah, boy, that's a nice guy. And that is really a lot of the seat of respect. Just knowing that you're doing something for the best interest of somebody else, not just for your ego. And Ephus seemed like he learned that from Jesus as a follower. Yeah, am I on the right track there, Robert?
You are on the right track, and it's interesting that the first tool that the Lord put into Ephus's life, actually, to help teach him that was a dog. And the dog becomes Ephus's friend. But there was a turmoil period there at the beginning, because this yellow dog and Ephus did not get along at the beginning of their relationship. And he has to learn humility amazingly with this animal first, who becomes his friend.
Isn't this something? Get the animals in there too, eh? They're a part of life, people, as you are on People of Distinction, and as Robert is with his great new book, Ephus and the Praying Bushel. And I want you to order that at Amazon.com. And, we're going to take it out with a couple of things here. We have some minutes left in the show, Robert. This is really gripping. I like what you're talking about. Is there a message for today's world in all of this? Now, you mentioned Palestine. Okay, so Palestine is in the news. You were talking about humility. And we know, there are some leaders that could learn a lesson that Ephus could tell them and teach them, and Jesus could teach them about humility. And we don't have to name names here. Is there a message for today's world with Ephus and the Praying Bushel?
Yes, that love and kindness are bigger than the trouble of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Love and in fact, that is the message of life ultimately. Love and kindness, and it conquers anything that is less than that. And most things of this world seem to be less than that. They seem to be built on ego, profit, self-aggrandizement, all of these things. But in the end, we need to understand the loving source from which we came, and getting back to that beautiful loving source as we knew it when we were first born, and then be reborn, so to speak, into that. So that's wonderful. If we did find, this is the final question here, possibility thinking, Robert. I end all of my shows with possibility thinking. If at some point in our human development, a year from now, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, maybe next week, if we're really lucky, if we do find in our heart and soul that spiritual value of love and kindness, and our world were based on that. Every baby that comes out, they meet a world of love and kindness, and there's no going back. All of a sudden, hey, my direction in life is to learn more about love and kindness, and to accrue more love and kindness from me and also others. If that were the case, possibilities now, what kind of world would that look like, Robert? that it doesn't look like now?
I think it would look like a world where a lot of the hatred, the division, the anger, the separation between people would fade away, because we are all people. We're all the same. We have the same aspirations. We all want to live a good life, and ultimately we all want to do something good. And it's just that sometimes we get it twisted and think that making ourselves look good is doing something good. Mm-hmm. And the message is that we all are part of the same whole. How we go up and how we go down is based on what is inside us. And if what is inside us is joy and hope and love, peace, kindness, then our world will be a much better place. And if we have that in us, then our job is to give it away to everyone we can.
Oh, boy, I'll tell you, wisdom there from our guest, Robert Paul Berry. And I'm going to cap off the show with a couple of cents of my own here to underscore the great words of Robert on People of Distinction. And this goes out to you, my listening audience right now. I'm going to end it with prayer. Not so much saying a prayer, but going back to that praying bushel in the title of Ephus and the praying bushel. People, prayer is a way to do many things. Overcome, and at the same time, become part of that beautiful spirit that Jesus is so representative of in what we think of the highest level of being a human being. As we know, Jesus was a human being, also divine. And in that highness of being a wonderful human being, when we pray, we should not just pray for ourselves, although that certainly is one of the functions of prayer. We should not just pray for our loved ones, although that is one of the functions of prayers. How about if we also occasionally pray for a stranger? See, at one point, Ephus was a stranger. He just roamed into wherever he roamed into, and Jesus, being a man at that point, didn't know Ephus. He might have scoped him out very quickly, but he didn't necessarily know that, Ephus was doing what he was doing with bushels and wine and all that stuff. But he learned. If we can learn, too, through prayer, and we can say, there's a brother or there's a sister out there that could use this prayer, and I don't even know exactly what the name of that brother and sister is, but we shoot out a prayer with humility, and we transmit it out there through that beautiful energy of love. It gets to the heart of somebody out there that might need that prayer. And then that person might say, wow, boy, I feel better about myself, or something happened that, wow, it's uplifting. And maybe shoot it back to you. And there are two now that are embraced in the love energy. And then maybe that prayer gets around other hearts and souls exponentially. And 2 equals 200, or maybe 2,000, or maybe 2 million or 2 trillion. You never know, because there are a lot of other sources out there that need prayer. And if we pray with humility, for those who we don't know, and sometimes maybe even for those who we don't like or we think we don't like, we're doing God's will in the end, because we're all children of God. And that's the message of People of Distinction with Al Cole. And we're so happy that Robert sings out that message, too, on People of Distinction. Robert Paul Berry, our special guest, and we thank him for the book that he's written, Ephus and the Praying Bushel. You can thank him by ordering that book, too, on Amazon.com. Thank you so much, Robert, for being my special guest.
Wonderful talking to you. Very, very interesting. You've illuminated a lot of aspects of this that I wanted to speak about anyway. We were working in concert.
There you go. Absolutely.
There's a higher purpose here. And I think that's the way things work.
It is the way things work. And thank you so much, Robert.